Continuing with the powers of the Senate and the role of the Senate in the federal government, while the House raises money and is the source of most laws, the Senate is the most involved, not only with the House and trying to balance the House's notion of the laws, but the Senate also has to watch the courts because it makes federal appointments to the judiciary, or it approves them through the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it has to look at the presidency and at foreign policy in order to decide to vote for or against the ratification of treaties. But the Senate also has the role to advise and consent to presidential proposals and decisions. Advise and consent means the right to vote for or against. So it is the advise and consent of the Senate that the president seeks when he recommends people to be federal judges or United States Supreme Court justices. The Senate Judiciary Committee reviews the case and then offers their advice, and they either consent or they don't. But this is also true for executive branch officials like the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Interior Secretary, and so forth. In these roles, the president is supposed to have some coordination or cooperation with the co-equal branch of Congress. So the president is required by law to put any person that they want to be their leading diplomat, Secretary of State, the manager of the military, Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, whatever, before the Senate for their advice and consent. The Senate will advise and consent or not. If they don't like an appointment, and sometimes they don't, they will not give their consent, and the president will be forced to pick someone else. This is one of the ways that our balance of power works. So that's pretty much it for our overview of Senate roles. The final thing we're going to be doing this week is looking at the leadership structure, the formal leadership structure in both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. Here, I'm going to use my Zoom feature. Hear that? Zoom. There we go. I love technology. So, in the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House is elected soon after the new Congress takes office in the January after the November election. The Speaker of the House is actually third in line to the presidency. If, God forbid, something were to happen to the President of the United States or to the Vice President, the third person in succession to President is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So if, God forbid, something happened to President Trump and to Vice President Pence, and I would say, God forbid, were it Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, or Jimmy Carter, and their vice presidents, it's not about party. I don't want anything bad to happen to anyone, and certainly not a president of the United States. But if something bad were to take both of them, the president and the vice president, out of office, the Speaker of the House of Representatives would become president. So Nancy Pelosi, who is as different from President Trump as can be, is actually 2 heartbeats away from the presidency. She is the president and the vice president. She's third in line of succession. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, because of the majority rule nature of the House, rules something like a dictator. She has great power to shape things, to reward or punish congressmen who go along with her or oppose her, both within her party and anyone in Congress. You don't mess with the Speaker of the House unless you're ready for a fight, and that's true of whoever holds the office. The House Majority Leader is the leader of the faction that rules. So when the Republicans ran things, it was Kevin McCarthy. Steny Hoyer now as the Democrats run things. But really, because the Speaker of the House is also of the same party that's going to appoint the majority leader. The Speaker of the House is the true leader of the House. The House Majority Leader is her right-hand man or woman. The House Majority Whip. Now there's a title to think about. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a whip. To be a whip means you're going to whip your side into shape. Whips, and the term comes from the British Parliament. A whip is someone who makes sure that the members of your party vote the way your party leadership wants you to vote. Whips have in their hands rewards and punishments. They are the enforcers of the Congress. The parties, both parties have them. There is a House Minority Leader who is the head of the minority party in the House. In this case, it's Republicans, and there is a Minority Whip. And the Minority Whip is there to make sure that the minority party also stays as much as possible as a monolithic bloc voting together. Now, all whips have to accept that there are times when people are going to go their own way. For a variety of reasons, they're not every Democrat or Republican is going to vote party line. But for the most part, whips are there to make sure that people vote like they should, like their party leaders tell them to. And that, by the way, gives you an added dimension. Are people who are congressional representatives there to represent the people? Are they there to represent their own interests? Or are they there to do what the party bosses tell them to do? And the answer is yes, all three. So, below the House leadership, the Speaker, the House Majority and Minority Leaders, the House Majority and Minority Whips, there are the various committee chairs who run the various committees of the House. And that is the formal leadership of the House of Representatives. The U.S. Senate has an interesting top of power structure because it's really not until you get to the number 3 man or woman that you end up with the genuine leader of the Senate. The official president of the Senate is the Vice President of the United States, whoever they are. And one of the duties of the Vice President of the United States is to preside over the Senate when they can. If there's going to be a close vote, you want the Vice President there because, if necessary, the Vice President, or whoever is the presiding officer of the Senate, gets to be a tiebreaker in certain cases. So the Vice President of the United States, who's also President of the Senate, does not get to vote on Senate legislation unless there is a tie. And if there is a tie, then the Vice President, President of the Senate, gets to cast the tie-breaking vote. So there's a little subtlety. Below the President of the Senate, who is the Vice President of the United States, there's the President pro tem of the Senate. And the President pro tem, it looks like it's spelled tempore, pro tempore. The President pro tem of the Senate is the presiding officer of the Senate when the Vice President is not around. The President pro tem is usually a senior senator of whatever party is in power. Usually it's somebody who is a little past their prime, but who is very, very well respected, usually often by people on both sides. And basically they've been there, they've done that, they are an old, wise person, and they are going to preside over the Senate when the Vice President isn't there. It's an honor given for long and valuable service by a political party. The Senate Majority Leader is the equivalent of the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The real power in terms of running the Senate day to day and making sure that one party's legislation beats the other party's legislation is the Senate Majority Leader, in this case, Republican Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell dominates the Senate much in the way that Nancy Pelosi dominates the House of Representatives. However, the tools at the disposal of the Speaker of the House are much sharper and more brutal than the tools of the Senate Majority Leader. The Senate Majority Leader still does have the power to really reward and punish. The Senate Majority Leader can decide to put pressure on people. But because the Senate is a more congenial, decorous body, it's more soft, it's more nuanced, it's more indirect, it's more soft-spoken. But still, there's power there. The Senate Majority Whip does the same thing in the Senate that the House Majority Whip does, except more subtly and more decorously. The Senate Minority Leader leads the minority party, in this case Charles Schumer of New York, and the Senate Minority Whip makes sure that the minority party also coheres most of the time and votes as a bloc. And then there are the various committee chairmen. So in this first week, we've had a chance to introduce ourselves to the Congress in more detail, and next week we're going to go into even more detail than that. Remember to do your quiz on the presidency and get your comments in on these videos by next Wednesday. I miss you, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.